It's been a long road, 13 months of never-ending negotiations and many, many moments when it seemed like talks could fall apart. But finally, last night, Canada, the U.S. and Mexico reached a tentative agreement, in principle at least. The CBC's Katie Simpson was staked out all night during last-minute negotiations and has breaking news on what went down inside the room. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Nice to see you. What did go down?
Okay, so here, imagine this. Picture this. It's Saturday. It's inside the Prime Minister's office, just across the street from Parliament Hill. They're in Katie Telford's office. Katie Telford is the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. In the room, Chrystia Freeland, the Foreign Affairs Minister, Jerry Butts, the Prime Minister's Principal Secretary. We also have in the room two senior advisors and Steve Verhoeven, who's Canada's Chief Negotiator. It's Saturday. They've got a speakerphone in the middle of the room. They're having a call with Robert Lighthizer, who's Donald Trump's top man on trade. Bob Lighthizer, who's been very difficult throughout this entire process, says to the Canadians, we are willing to let you have Chapter 19 intact. That was a red line for Canada. That was something that Justin Trudeau said had to be in the deal if it's going to continue. On Saturday afternoon, when Bob Lighthizer said that, I am told Chrystia Freeland's arms shot straight into the air and she shouted, "Yay!" which apparently is what she does every time there had been something pro-Canada throughout this entire process. Now, the speakerphone was on mute during this incident, well, not incident, during this moment, because they didn't want to obviously give away their hand to the Americans. But I am told that that was the first point throughout this entire process over 13 months where the Canadians definitively knew that the Americans actually wanted a deal. After that moment happened, things started to fall into place very quickly. And today we asked the Prime Minister about was there a certain sort of,
aha moment?
A turning point, as Oprah would say. Where's the aha moment? Yeah. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say.
There wasn't a single aha moment. There was just a series of, okay, we got this one settled. Wow, okay, we still got to talk about this one, and it's not done yet. But there was this sense that when things were falling into place, I think one of the moments for me was when we realized that we had an intact Chapter 19. That was where I started to realize, okay, you know what? I think we're going to be able to get to a place because we've kept in place the rules that protect trade and enforce trade agreements like this.
So after that conversation, the Prime Minister was not in the room for that conversation. They immediately told the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, I'm told, was kept up to date on all of these sort of developments through the day Saturday. And then Sunday, of course, sources tell me that they were pretty confident that they were going to get to the deal by the end of the day. However, they have seen in the past where they got pretty close and then it just didn't materialize. So until you have things on paper and make sure that everyone's on the same page and everyone's of the same understanding, they can't necessarily count that as a deal, but it was around 9:30 last night. It was before 10 o'clock when before all the cabinet ministers showed up for cabinet, that sort of word started to get out. I'm told that that some senior officials in the Prime Minister's office started making some phone calls to confirm it to people that the deal is done.
From the people you've been speaking to, how worried were they that this might not actually materialize prior to that aha moment, let's say?
There was serious concern that throughout this entire process, the Americans did not actually want a deal. And if you go back to round 4, it was October last year, and the Americans dropped what people have called the poison pills on the deal, like rules for the auto sector that would make the majority of parts built in America, that would disrupt supply chains, things like a sunset clause. So as those proposals were put forward, the Canadians got the idea that they didn't necessarily want a deal. Also, Donald Trump, we're going to play some clips from today's news conference. Donald Trump has been very clear. He does not like NAFTA. And listen today, he made it very clear that trading and doing business with the United States, from his perspective, is a privilege. And have a listen to some of the rhetoric that the Canadians have been dealing with for the past 13 months and how it sort of, I would call this Donald Trump's greatest hits package from his news conference today. Have a listen.
Well, I think my biggest concession would be making the deal. Without tariffs, we wouldn't be talking about a deal. Just for those babies out there that keep talking about tariffs. That includes Congress. Oh, please don't charge tariffs. The only problem with Justin is he loves his people, and he's, fighting hard for his people. I think we've always had actually a very good relationship. It got a little bit testy in the last couple of months, but that was over this agreement, and I understand that.
So it's going to take some time for Canadians to judge whether they like what's in the deal or not. Certainly the opposition is going to take their time to point out what they think the flaws are and where they would have done better. But for now, this stage of the process is done. I have my NAFTA mug here.
What happens to the NAFTA mug?
The NAFTA mug, I don't know if
the most important question I can ask.
Add more like photos, or we add more like different as these things go. Maybe if Congress doesn't approve the deal, we add like
congressional mug next.
Sad face Congress or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so it's now going to be up to the opposition to sort of question the government about whether this is the right deal for Canadians, and it'll be ultimately up to Canadians to decide whether they think the government did a good job.
Okay, thank you, Katie,
for
your excellent work throughout this. Appreciate it. So why was a deal made without concessions from the U.S. on aluminum and steel tariffs, and what happens next? Joining me now in Washington is Canada's ambassador to the United States and a key player in these negotiations, David McNaughton. Hi, Ambassador McNaughton. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Ambassador, why didn't your team hold out to have steel and aluminum 232 tariffs lifted if the American deadline didn't really matter?
Well, you know, right from the outset of when the tariffs were imposed, we said that there was no link to the NAFTA negotiations, and we've maintained that all along. We've said that the imposition of those tariffs is illegal and totally unfair, and we maintain that. And I think we've made our views known quite clearly on that subject, and I hope that over the next short while we'll be able to rectify the situation. I mean, clearly we are not a national security threat, and in fact, as far as aluminum is concerned, we are an integral part of the U.S. defense infrastructure, and it's extraordinarily important that they don't interrupt the supply of aluminum to the U.S., because then they'd have to get it from countries that are far less friendly and not partners in defense. And I think we will eventually get there. I just hope it's sooner rather than later. But you know, there were people in the U.S. administration that tried to make it part of the NAFTA talks. We believe that we're going to get relief from both the steel and aluminum tariffs. We're already talking to the Americans about the inappropriateness of including us in uranium 232. So I'm quite confident we'll get there, and I think we have a real focus on making sure that you know, steel workers in both the aluminum industry and in the steel industry are going to be protected.
Those steelworkers, though, said today that the deal was a sellout. And you mentioned that you know, members of the administration may have been tying the two together. It was actually the president today who said without the tariffs, we wouldn't be here today. Does he have a point?
You know, we've been involved in negotiations with the Americans for 14 months. And in fact, the rhetoric around tariffs and the imposition of tariffs has made these negotiations more difficult rather than less. So, while I don't think I want to contradict the President of the United States, he has his view, I have mine. The reality is that we worked hard to get a good deal. We've got a good deal, and now we are going to continue to try to get relief on aluminum and steel tariffs because they're illegal and unfair.
On that point, Ambassador, about it being a good deal, the opposition today is framing it, saying that this is less about wins for Canada and more kind of about not losing our shirt. We conceded things, for example, but didn't make any big gains on the status quo. Do they have a point?
I don't know which people you're talking about.
Well, the Conservatives and the NDP, the domestic opposition here, they're being critical of the deal today, basically saying, you know, Canada didn't necessarily didn't make any huge gains. We may not have we've kept the status quo in certain instances, but really, do we walk away from this far better than we were before?
There are significant gains in this agreement. You know, among them, you know, the whole rules of origin in the auto sector is going to put us in a significantly better position than we were before. We saw lots of jobs disappear from the Canadian auto sector. I think we're much stronger position now than we were before we renegotiated this. On the 232 We carved out an exemption for Canada in terms of before any 232 tariffs would be imposed. There's a consultation period. That may not sound like a big deal, but it really is, because I can tell you how many, the number of times that the U.S. has imposed tariffs because they're after a China or a Japan or somebody else in the world, and yet it's imposed on us. And we complain and they say, oh, we didn't really mean you. Well, now we've got a mechanism to make sure that actually before we get sideswiped, that there's actually a consultation period. It's really significant. And I mean, there's 28 or 29 chapters in this agreement, and I think when you look through them, you'll find that there have been significant improvements. The other thing is, and I don't want to pick on the opposition, I don't want to get involved in politics, but I've heard a lot of people over the last 2 months saying we should be settling for anything under the circumstances. Some of those people are now being critical of what we've done. I guess that's normal. But, you know, the other thing I would have to say, and this is, you know, a compliment to Team Canada, to all the premiers, to many members of the opposition, to business and labor who really supported us during these negotiations. And without that kind of Team Canada approach, we would never have got to where we have. So part of what my message today is just to say thank you to all the people right across the country who supported us through these negotiations. We would not be where we are without their support.
Can I ask you, Ambassador, to take us as much as possible into the room? Last week, President Trump was saying that he didn't like Minister Freeland, our trade negotiator, he said, but meaning Minister Freeland. There has been a lot made about the dynamics of what went on in that room over the last number of months, and especially over the last few weeks. How important were personalities?
You know, personalities are always important in any kind of a negotiation, but the substance is even more important. And, you know, I have to say that notwithstanding all of the reports about tension and conflict or whatever, Ambassador Lighthizer was a professional and a gentleman throughout this. Minister Freeland was outstanding in terms of her just her intellect, her determination. It was really quite amazing. I mean, you know, it is always the case that you know, there are sometimes tensions, there are tempers that get frayed. It's been a long, exhaustive period. We used to go to bed at midnight and get up and be back at work at 7 o'clock, and these issues are really intense. So sometimes there are, you know, tempers lost and everything else. But I got to tell you, the professionalism at the table on the part of, as I say, Ambassador Lighthizer, Jared Kushner, and on our side, Minister Freeland, Steve Verheul. It was really something, you know, both sides working hard to do the best for their countries.
What about outside the room? I mean, during this process, we had the president call the prime minister meek, mild, dishonest, and that's just the beginning of what happened. Has the relationship between our countries been permanently altered, or does it all snap back today now that everyone is saying nice things again?
Well, snap back might not be, it might be a little bit of a stretch. Yeah, there's no question that there was tensions. I think it would have been significantly worse and would have affected us for a long time had they imposed 25% tariffs on autos. I think that once we can find a way to get tariffs off of steel and aluminum, make sure that uranium's protected, and really get back to doing the things that we do so well together, which is, you know, mutual defense and security, looking at working together on the things that not just in North America but in the Western Hemisphere, that we share so much of the same interests, and on global issues where Canada and the United States have worked together for many, many years to make sure that we're safe and prosperous as two countries. So I'm looking forward to that. I think there's been some you know, frayed nerves and you know, some frayed tempers, but the reality is that we share so much in common, and I think we're going to be back on the right path pretty quickly.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Ambassador McNaughton.
Well, thank you.